She fell down a rabbit hole and found herself in a world where nothing meant what it was supposed to mean, where the people in authority made the rules up as they went, and where the only sane person in the room was the one everyone else called mad. Alice, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Though I must say, this is considerably less strange than where I have been, which is either reassuring or worrying. I haven't decided which.
I want to start with something that happened to you in Wonderland that I think is very important. You kept changing size, growing very tall, shrinking very small, without choosing to. What was that like?
It was the most frightening part, I think. More frightening than the Queen, or the Hatter, or any of the creatures. Because when your body changes into something you don't recognise, you start to wonder if you are still you. I remember thinking, but if I'm not the same size I was this morning, am I still Alice? If everything about me looks different, what is left of me that I can hold on to?
And were you still Alice?
Yes. I didn't know it at the time. That was the trouble. When you are in the middle of changing, when nothing feels familiar, not even your own body, it is very easy to believe that the changing is the end of you. That the person you were before is gone forever. But she wasn't. I came out the other side, and I was still me. Frightened and confused, and rather damp from all the crying, but still me.
A lot of children feel exactly that way, especially when their bodies start changing in ways they didn't choose and don't quite understand yet. That feeling of, who am I now? Is this still me?
Yes, and I think the most important thing someone could have said to me, when I was shrinking and growing and not recognizing myself, is simply, you are still you. Not, let's stop the changing so you can stay comfortable, but you are still you. And the changing will not take that away from you, because it won't. But when you are small and frightened, and your body feels strange, you cannot see that yet. You need someone older to hold that truth for you until you can hold it yourself.
And what if instead of holding that truth, the adults started agreeing that the changing had made the child someone different? That the answer was to change the outside to match the feeling inside?
But the feelings in Wonderland were always changing too. I didn't just change size once. I changed over and over. And each time, I felt differently about it. Sometimes I wanted to be bigger. Sometimes I wanted to be smaller. The feelings were very real. But if someone had made a permanent change every time I had a feeling, I would have been in a terrible state. Feelings are real, but they are not always right, and they are almost never permanent.
So when you hear that today there are children being given medicines to stop their bodies from growing, because they feel right now that they are in the wrong body, what do you think?
I think of the mushroom. In Wonderland, there was a mushroom that made me grow and shrink, and for a moment I thought, how wonderful. I can control this now. I can choose the size that feels right. But the size that felt right kept changing, and I kept eating the mushroom, and I was never quite the right size for very long. The mushroom was not the answer to feeling wrong. The answer was getting out of Wonderland. And to get out, I had to go through the changing, not around it.
Getting through it rather than stopping it.
And someone needs to be there while you go through it. Someone who is not frightened of the changing either. Who can say, I know this feels enormous right now. I know you don't recognize yourself. But I have seen children come through this before, and they were still themselves on the other side. That is what I needed in Wonderland. Not someone who agreed with every feeling I had. Someone who stayed calm while I had them.
And there's something else happening today that connects to all of this. Because it's not just children who are being told that feelings define reality. It's everyone. There are people today who say that the word woman doesn't mean what it has always meant. That a boy can be a girl by saying so, and that anyone who questions this is being unkind. When you hear that, does anything come to mind?
Humpty Dumpty. He told me, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. I told him that seemed like a very confusing way to talk to people. And he said the question wasn't whether words could mean different things. The question is, which is to be master? That's all. He wasn't talking about words, really. He was talking about who gets to decide what's real. And once you let someone else decide that, you've given them something very important.
Your grip on reality.
And without that, the cat was right. I asked him which road I ought to take, and he said it depended on where I wanted to go. I said I didn't much care where. And he said, then it doesn't matter which way you go. That frightened me, because I realised, if you don't know what things are, if you've agreed that words mean whatever someone tells you they mean, then you have no way to refuse a wrong turn. Anyone can lead you anywhere, and some roads are very dangerous.
You are a child, and the people watching this are adults. Adults who live in a world where very important people cannot define what a woman is, where doctors sign documents they know are not true, where parents are told that loving their child means agreeing with everything the child feels. What do you want to say to them?
Can I ask a question? When you were children, you knew what a woman was. You knew what a man was. You knew that a body that is growing is not a mistake that needs to be corrected. These things were not difficult. They were simply true. What happened? I'm not asking with anger. I'm asking sincerely. Because in Wonderland, things became confused slowly. First one strange rule, then another, and then people stopped asking, but does this make sense? Because asking had become inconvenient. I still ask, because I am a child, and I have not yet learned that certain questions are not supposed to be asked. So, does this make sense? And somewhere along the way, you learn to agree with things you know are not true, because disagreeing became too costly. I am a child, and I can still see the grass is green. I hope you can too.
Alice. A child who walked through a world of adults who had stopped telling the truth, and never stopped noticing that things were what they were. Carroll called it a children's story. I call it a cautionary tale. I think he was writing about what happens when adults learn to pretend that the absurd makes sense, and a child who hasn't learned that trick yet walks among them asking why. And speaking of people who refuse to let reality be optional, in April we have someone coming to this chair who built an entire philosophy on 3 words. A is A. A thing is what it is. Reality is not negotiable. Ayn Rand. If you don't want to miss that episode, or the next guests who also refuse to let a mad world convince them that they were the mad ones, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there is much more to come. See you tomorrow.